So that's not my job, that's the speaker's job. I'm gonna shut up now and quickly introduce Deirdre who is the Vice President and Dean of Bard College, just up the river in Annandale and Hudson. She told me recently, quote, "I've always seen my role as teacher as the foundation for everything else. I will definitely be invoking today what I've learned in the classroom." She teaches a course at Bard on women and leadership. And this is what one of her students posted online. She's the best, so smart and caring, and gives the best advice, really on the student side, and wants us all to be successful. Okay, Deirdre.
Good morning.
I'm Deirdre there. Thank you for that introduction, Brad. And wow, I try to never look at what anybody says online, so I'm really glad that was a nice quote that Brad found. I'm so honored to be here today with you all to speak from where I come from, Bard College, as an educator and as a person who's dedicated her life to studying actually 19th century women's authorship and the connection that their work as tellers of stories had to do in times of great social change, the Industrial Revolution, to help people imagine a way forward to a more humane and equitable future in England during that time. I'm particularly focused on the work of a writer named Elizabeth Gaskell, and if you've never read Elizabeth Gaskell, I highly recommend her novels. And I am wearing a tweed jacket. So I feel I'm fulfilling my function, as Eric said, as a teacher, as a professor. My topic to address with you today is leadership at a crossroads. We are clearly at a crossroads, and in the time that I've spent working with young people in this course, Women in Leadership, we've spent a lot of time interrogating what leadership really means. What does a leader look like? It's actually one of the first exercises we do together is we write about. When you hear the word leader or leadership, what is the mental image that you conjure up in your mind? It's a really fascinating exercise. I would encourage you to do it yourself. And one of the most beautiful through lines in the last 10 years of teaching the course is as often as people think of Kamala Harris or Hillary Clinton or I don't know, Barack Obama or whatever presidential figure you want to think of, they also think of their grandmother. They think of their mother. They think of their aunt. They think of people who have been very close to them in their lives and who have inspired them to lead in their own ways, in their own communities and with the people closest to them. So it's a tremendous honor to be here today at a place where Mohan Consultations has really created space for this kind of intentional, thoughtful, dialogue-driven inquiry. And I'm looking forward to sharing a little bit of what I've learned in my time teaching at Bard, and also, I think, give us a little moment to talk with each other toward the end of my remarks. I will reiterate, I'm a teacher. My interest in leadership grows out of my vocation, which is what it is, as an educator. I believe that leadership can be learned. It is something that we are dedicated to demystifying, to breaking it down into practices, to looking at how everyday activities are actually part of a leadership practice that we can all focus on intentionally and grow stronger in our practice as leaders, wherever we find ourselves. And certainly, ever since I can remember as a young person, I was really aware of all the different models of leadership I saw around me, right? Whether that was in my church, my school, my community, people I saw on television, people I heard about through studying history and literature. For me, thinking about leadership is very much about stories of different people's journey towards leadership. And so in this course, Women in Leadership, which we designed 10 years ago, I, with my fellow teachers, Erin Canan, who is Vice President for Civic Engagement at Bard College, and Michelle Murray, Associate Professor of Politics, we together created a course that intentionally focuses on students who are just arriving at college, first-year students. People who are just trying to find their way across campus, just trying to figure out where the financial aid office is, figuring out how the loop bus works. We want to talk with students when they arrive on campus to very intentionally give them an experience of connecting to older students, to students who are more experienced and know their way around campus, to mentors and others in the campus community, and then more broadly to leaders and mentors and teachers beyond Annandale. The course is called Women and Leadership. The ampersand is important. We say on the first day, we have no particular right answer about what the relationship is between women and leadership. We don't make any assumptions about people's identity entering the space. Going to Brad's point, we make no assumptions about political commitments or ideological standpoint. And in fact, we spend a lot of time encouraging people to push outside the things that they believe and know as they arrive on the college campus and begin to engage with many, many other kinds of people. Our classes, we've been really blessed. I'm very happy to say our classes has always been a wonderful, large constellation of students from different countries, from different sort of perspectives. We do have older students who want to join the class, and we ask them to help us as mentors with the students. And the baseline assumption is this is a question. Women and leadership is going to be about a question. And many, if not most of the students who arrive for their first class meeting in the chapel, which is where we meet every week, have a really, really vexed relationship to the idea of leadership. They're pretty skeptical. I'm just going to say, they have ideas that leadership is something that they really want to interrogate, and they don't necessarily recognize their own ideas about what matters to them as individuals as corresponding to what they see as positional leadership, right? People who fulfill these roles in very prominent public spaces as leaders with a capital L. So one of the questions we as teachers have to ask is, what is alienated? I'm like looking at the Bard students and the New Paltz students, what has alienated you from this idea of leadership? What is it that we worry we will lose if we step into those spaces to lead, right? And there's a really rich literature in psychology and sociology that gives us some, I think, coordinates for thinking about that. But we worry we're going to lose a sense of connectedness. We worry that we're going to put ourselves in a kind of position of authority over, as opposed to relational connection with our peers or our communities or our families or the people we care about. Furthermore, we worry that becoming a leader might entail making compromises we just aren't willing to make, right? That it seems like we become part of a kind of organizational system and institutional cultures that may not support the values that you would bring as a member of that community. So what we try to talk about together is how can we develop more capacious, relational ideas of how leadership is at work in the world? How do we recognize it when it's right in front of us? And how do we begin to build a kind of clearer sense of pathways for ourselves and certainly for our students to step into those spaces? So this class, as we like to say, is about showing up, right? Am I right? It's about showing up. You have to be there every week. I'm calling one of my former students here. It's about showing up, and we go places and we talk to people. So I'll give you two examples of trips that have been very, I think, eye-opening for many generations of students in this class. First, we like to go spend the day at West Point. We go to West Point. In fact, now, actually this year we did not go to West Point because all of the groups that used to welcome us, the Corbin Women's Leadership Forum and other groups that are really dedicated to building a more diverse core of cadets and future leaders in the Army have all been disbanded. However, we have traditionally gone to West Point for the day to study the leadership curriculum they have developed with the motto, duty, honor, country. That's been the motto at West Point since 1898. They recently updated it, but duty, honor, country. And it's a pretty great moment when our group arrives and the students sit down in the mess hall with a group of kids who have to eat their meal in about 15 minutes from start to finish and talk with them about what they're learning about leadership in their classrooms, right, at West Point. The U.S. Military Academy's mission is clear: to build, educate, train, and inspire the Corps of Cadets to be the commissioned leaders of character, committed to Army values, and ready for a lifetime of service to the Army and nation. Okay, so that's the mission of the leadership curriculum. The first time we showed up there and we met with a bunch of officers who were teaching the leadership curriculum, the head officer turned to me and said, "Okay, what's your leadership curriculum, Deirdre?" I said, "We don't have this one leadership curriculum." And it's like, no, we don't have a document, which is exactly everything we're teaching. In fact, our leadership curriculum is we're coming out, we're learning about your leadership curriculum. We're all here to listen. And one of the challenges, of course, is some people came into the room and the space and they were not comfortable and they did not like things they were hearing or things they thought they would be hearing. And by the end of the day, typically our students would say, those students are amazing. And the questions they're asking are fantastic. And I thought I knew what people would be like at the U.S. Military Academy. And you know what? I was all wrong. The second place we like to visit, and we just went there on Friday, is the United Nations. So thank you for that setup, Brad. And of course, the United Nations is a place where we encounter a very different language of aspiration and mission and a sense of the meaning and purpose of the work of all those incredibly committed people who go to work every day and during the General Assembly to the United Nations. And if we think about the language of the preamble of the United Nations Charter, I'll just read a few lines of it because it's quite long. We, the peoples of the United Nations, determine to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which twice in our lifetime has brought untold sorrow to mankind, and to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, in the equal rights of men and women and of nations large and small, and to establish conditions under which justice and respect for the obligations arising from treaties and other sources of international law can be maintained. Faith dedicated to this beautiful mission. And it's a mission, of course, that is under contestation every single day of the existence of the United Nations, right? A vision of a multilateral, cooperative organization, truly global in its reach, as opposed to unilateral or national self-interest that is constantly, right, in a kind of tug of war with the work at the United Nations. So when we visit the U.S. Military Academy and the United Nations, our students encounter deeply rooted places in meaning and purpose, right? These are both institutions that are clearly holding themselves to a very, very high standard of ethics. One is dedicated to military virtue, a lifetime of service to the Army and nation, and the other is committed to unite our strengths and maintain international peace and security around the globe. Both organizations, as different as they may appear to be, do stress leadership in service to a committed and participatory we. I can't emphasize that strongly enough, and I think our students see it when we go into these places. The emphasis on the place of the individual in relationship to some kind of community that holds itself to the highest possible standards. And we like to think about that in opposition to, or certainly tension with, some more traditional and maybe resurgent models of leadership, a kind of will to power associated with the great man theory of leadership, first outlined in the 1840s, my period I study, by Thomas Carlyle in Hero Worship and the Heroic in History. So our goal in this course is to open our students' minds and their hearts to strong, compelling, conflicting, and yes, even very different accounts of what it means to become a leader. And certainly anyone with even a cursory interest in leadership knows that it can be and has been defined in so many different spheres with different language. I'll just name a few of the most kind of dominant or influential theories that we, in different ways, sort of mention in the course of a semester. Transformational leadership, adaptive leadership. Ronald Heifetz's work is really important here. Transactional leadership, situational leadership, the social change model of leadership, servant leadership. The list does go on because leadership is about a lot of different things in a lot of different contexts. So we're not just thinking about politics. We're not just thinking about higher ed, which is the space I live and work in. We're trying to think about it across many spaces. Leadership is about change. Leadership is about accountability. Leadership is about disruption. Leadership is about unity. Leadership may purport to protect us. Leadership may also exert power in order to punish us. There is a politics of resentment and there is an ethics of care. How do we navigate a world where we see these being enacted every single day? Of course, the very important distinction that many people try to talk about is models that are based in power over others, right? Hierarchical models of leadership, about control, about authority and hierarchy, and leadership that is about power with, which is about sharing power, about cooperation, about collaboration, about real connectedness and relationality. And we need to look clear-eyed into how both forms of power actually shape the world we find ourselves in, and our students will grow up to participate in, even as they do now, in all of the ways they are involved in our world. The important thing to impart for us is there is not one key to leadership or the key to all leadership theories, but rather an awareness that the language we use and the narratives we invoke really matter. And I just have to say that again. The story that we heard from Eric earlier this morning, that's a story. And we know about ideas of how we belong with and to each other through stories that we tell with, to each other. And it differs enormously depending on whether we're talking about leadership that is required to become a successful CEO, or we're talking about being a grassroots activist who wants to affect positive change in the community. Both are valid, both have limitations, both offer insight and meaning in our quest to understand leadership today in a critical time. This fall marks the 10th year of our course, Women and Leadership. And we have worked with undergraduate students of all genders in our inquiry. We launched the course in response to a lot of different factors, but one really important one was a study that came out from Princeton in 2011, the Steering Committee on Undergraduate Women's Leadership, which was formed by President Shirley Tillman, the first woman president at Princeton. And the university had just marked the 40th anniversary of coeducation for undergraduate women at Princeton. So how were the women doing? Obviously, it's an extremely competitive environment for these women to come to Princeton. And there was a sense that maybe it was time to take stock and find out how they were doing. What did the commission find? Well, they found that while some women do run for elected office, many students choose less visible jobs behind the scenes. Women may express interest in more prominent posts, but have sometimes been actively discouraged by other students. Undergraduate women do a large percentage of the work in the organizations to which they belong. Women may feel pressured to behave in certain socially acceptable ways. At Princeton, women, this is the finding of the commission, their words, perhaps more than some other campuses, beginnings matter, as one alumna put it. The start counts. I'll come back to that in a minute. And women benefit from mentoring. I would say all people benefit from mentoring by older students, faculty, staff, and alumni, and from encouragement by their peers. So the findings of that commission were important to what we did in building our course. The start counts. Today is the time to begin thinking about what it means to be a leader. You don't have to wait to become a senior. You don't have to wait until you've gotten your master's degree or whatever it is you think you might be waiting for to give you the authority to begin to make something happen. And that's why in the course every week we focus on a very specific how-to, right? Again, we're about demystifying leadership. It's a practice that we can engage in together. I don't think I have time to do the exercise I had intended to, but maybe we could do it at the break if Brad will give me the opportunity to share it. But one of our favorite activities, and we just did it 2 weeks ago, is called Falling in Love with a Stranger. And we spend a full hour having everyone in the class talk to someone they really do not know. So I think it would take too much time to get everyone to get up and move around and sit with someone they don't know. But what we find is in engaging in ever deeper questioning and listening exercises that are guided with some key questions, by the end of an hour, we know someone we would never have spoken with. And the people who've come back to say that was a moment that really changed their experience at Bard has been quite numerous, even after they've graduated. What we hope then to instill in our students is a critical awareness of what is at stake in stepping up and stepping forward, reaching out across sense of difference, somebody you think you know who they are and what they're like, and across the lines that divide us, in person, but also and especially, my son said this to me yesterday, online. Right? Because if we engage with people, like-minded people online, it confirms an ever deeper sense, as he said, that who you think you are is almost like a faith-based belief system, right? And it's getting harder every day for all of us to break out of the sort of invisible prison that our online sort of realities may be erecting around us. Princeton's definition of what it is to be a leader, I think, is helpful here from that commission on undergraduate women. Leaders define or clarify goals for a group. That sounds pretty, that's not too hard to imagine. They clarify or define goals for a group and mobilize the energies of members of that group to accomplish the goals. That's it. We can all do that. And we all do that. What I've learned over the past decade that we've always been at a crossroads when it comes to leadership, especially for young people. We don't know what tomorrow's leaders will look like because generational change is real. As my friend Erin Canan likes to say, teaching leadership is as much about getting out of the way as it is about mentoring students to take any particular path. And at any given point in time, we are living together simultaneously in a past, present, and future. We are living at a time now where we have what the social critic Raymond Williams once called 3 categories of cultural reality. He talks about residual, dominant, and emergent ways of being. All of these realities exist side by side. In November 2025, we see dominant, residual, and emergent ideas of leadership being practiced and debated side by side in our workplaces. I don't know if you guys saw that recent op-ed by Ross Douthat about like have women, something about women in the workplace. You're nodding, yeah, very controversial. Have women kind of coming into the workplace sort of ruin society. Okay, we can talk about that. In our workplaces, our politics, our families, and our communities. Some see the coexistence of these ideas as an existential struggle, a zero-sum game, because we assume there is an inexorable and unidirectional march of history. I'm glad I've lived long enough to live through the end of history at least a couple of times, and to see it, in fact, is not over. But for the purposes of the conference today, we do think of ourselves at a crossroads, a both and moment. The LED tells us that the place where 2 roads cross each other is a place of intersection. It's also a point at which 2 or more courses of action diverge, a critical turning point. At a crossroads, we can come together even as we come apart. What I have learned from my students makes me profoundly hopeful. I do feel hopeful because politics is the art of the possible, as Bismarck said, the attainable, the art of the next best. And our students know that. They have weathered a pandemic. They have lived through some tumultuous times of electoral politics, and they turn up. They show up not only for themselves, but for people they have never met. They are idealists and they are pragmatists. They're not afraid to ask directly, often with humor and compassion, why? Why are these conventions, conventional? And that asking can take many forms. It may affront or even amaze us. It may break with norms and assumptions that elders hold dear. It may look like a politics we can't comprehend. It could read as progressive, regressive, or something entirely different. And I, for one, look forward to seeing which road they will travel. And I'm hopeful that I too can learn as they do what new forms of leadership are possible as a result. Thank you.